Hello again, I'm Andreas Karamitas, your host for this episode, and we are delighted to welcome Katie Adamson, a world futurist, to our WISTA International AGM in Cyprus. With her sharp wit and insights, she will challenge our assumptions about the future and inspire us to explore new possibilities. Many thanks to our sponsor, Chototeo Global, Darth Marine, and Bernard Schultz for their support and to make this podcast reality.
Actually, the issues that we face around increasing the diversity, and I'm talking specifically about female participation here, because diversity obviously is bigger than just female participation. But if I talk specifically about that, these are very often practical, operational, and financial and economic reasons. And, those are not going to be solved by technology. I mean, an interesting stat is that something like 70% plus of all caring responsibilities around the world still fall on women.
Oh my
And
God.
when I grew up in a Western liberal democracy, that's quite shocking to me. But for an awful lot of the people globally in the shipping industry, that will not be a surprising stat at all. They have grown up still in cultures and communities where a lot of women don't work at all. And if they do, they're certainly expected still to maintain the home and the family, and cook and do all the domestic and caring responsibilities. So if you put diversity in the maritime industry and shipping industry in that context, I think it's
Mhm.
actually not very surprising at all that we don't have more women, certainly sailing at least. And I also think that the idea that adoption of technology is somehow going to change that
Mhm.
is equally false, because these are deep-rooted cultural and, as I say, economic reasons as well. Because in a lot of areas in the world, women still don't earn as much as men do, and a lot of women try and earn, a little bit here and there, doing small jobs that are nothing like the careers that we talk about women having, in other parts of the world. So what you're really saying is, in order to
Mhm.
get more women into, at sea, you need to
Mhm.
change global attitudes to women. And I think, to be
Okay.
fair, that's a big ask for one industry,
Yeah.
right? Okay, we could be part of that. We can be part of a coalition that moves to do that. But I don't think you can expect shipping to do that on its own. Are there specific areas that you could
Mhm.
address? Yes, of course you could. You could make, ships at sea more inclusive. But I think, again, that's a cultural thing. No, that's a cultural thing that needs to happen within companies. Do we need legislation? Do we need reporting to help drive that? Yes, we do. But I think that's where ESG is beginning to make a bit of a difference.
How can the shipping industry leverage technology to navigate the complexities of global trade and geopolitics in a rapidly changing world?
I think actually what it really comes down to is data, is better data. I think a lot of our assumptions about the world, and therefore about the future, because I always say that the biggest handicap all of us face in trying to understand the future is
Hmm.
overconfidence in our beliefs about today, right? Our assumptions about today. And a lot of that comes from the data around us. We hear an
Okay.
awful lot about how much progress, global trade has brought. But
Yeah.
the reality is that, we have massive wealth inequality across the world. So, there are some big conversations going on now about just how beneficial trade is. And you mentioned technology there, and here's a really important point, that technology, uh, is not in itself a driver of equality. It
Hmm.
can enable an advantage, but all it does very often is embed, what's going on in a system. It is used to optimize a system. And I think what we've got is problems with the system. So when you have people saying, well, global trade, is great, we need to do more of it. How do we do it more efficiently? And then you start talking about technology. Well, technological automation actually gets rid of jobs. And that's a
Okay.
problem, because a lot of the jobs in logistics, something like 70 or
Hmm.
80% of the jobs in logistics, are actually held by men. So here's an interesting diversity angle for you here, right?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
When we automate in logistics and shipping, we're actually,
Hmm.
well, because companies are designed to maximize profit, they will automate rather than invest in people. So what you're actually saying is, we're probably going to reduce the number of jobs. And if
Okay.
70 to 80% of the jobs are male, you're going to reduce those jobs. Now, can I put this in a geopolitical context for you? What I've just said is we need to be part of a coalition that says we need to be inclusive and bring women into the workplace. Across the world now, we are seeing a big backlash against the participation of women, right? And a lot of that is coming from men who have been basically become technologically unemployed. And they're seeing women taking more and more roles. And then the traditional male roles, you know, in logistics, at sea, the more heavy industries are being automated out. So we have a really big question as a world to ask ourselves, which is technological automation actually genuinely reasonable to do because of the men it's going to displace? It's very interesting in shipping because you get this narrative that more technology is going to empower women. And well, it is in a way, because the more you remove jobs from sea, the more easy it is ashore for women to take those jobs. But it's going to bring up a really big, important question, which is what about all the male seafarers that we have that are already qualified? What happens to them? And that is as important for female participation as it is for male, because men who look at global trade, who look at technology, who look at globalization and say, this is actually disadvantaging me, are very likely to be drawn into conversations by, you know, forces who want to exploit those conversations that say women are the problem here. And I am being displaced because women are taking roles. It's a very complex issue here, but it's one that we need to start talking about, right? It's not just women at sea, it's diversity in the industry.
Yes, I totally agree with that, because we need to embrace this idea of diversity. It's not just to fight about human rights, but also it's about culture. It's about to know what is diversity exactly.
And what we value, exactly, and what we
Yeah.
value, because we should value cognitive diversity. We should value having lots of different voices. And that's really important, because let's talk about technology just for a moment. If you look at the technology industry, only about 15 to 20% of all jobs in AI are held by women. About 15% of jobs in data and cloud are held by women. Women startups in technology attract about 2% of all venture capital funding globally. And if you look at tech directors, right, across the world, only about, well, actually between 3 and 5% of directors of technology around the world are Asian or Hispanic women. I mean, these are shocking. So, I mean, we think that shipping has a gender problem. Technology has a massive gender problem. So just saying technology is going to solve this is frankly for the birds.
Okay. Let us speak a little bit about leadership now. What is the role of leaders in the shipping industry in guiding their organization through the complexities of global trade and geopolitics?
Okay, there are two levels to this. On the one level, there is what does it take as an individual to be a leader in this new world? And I'll tackle that first, which is traditionally we've wanted leaders really to command and control. Yeah. And what we're seeing now is to solve these big issues, to bring together all these different players into ecosystems to actually address things like diversity, decarbonization, all these big challenges. What that needs is a different kind of approach, a convene and catalyze approach, the ability to bring people together, create the environment where they can collaborate and then get out the way. And that's not what we've trained leaders to do. I mean, leaders of all genders and all persuasions, right? So there is a change in the nature of leadership that we need. And a lot of this you see within companies is about agility. So agile means creating the environment where people can dynamically and autonomously sort of respond both to revenue generating opportunities and also to risks as well. And that takes a very different kind of non-hierarchical organization. So this is a really big culture shift within an organization. But what we need in organizations is to be adaptable, and we need leaders who are ready who are nimble and agile and have people around them who they can trust. An awful lot of this is about trust. People don't do things because they're scared they're going to lose their job. They do things because they really believe that it's worth doing and that they're contributing, right? So there's a whole piece around agile there that's important. But I said there were two parts to this. So that's one level. But once you get to the kind of more geopolitical, if you like, geostrategic level, what we're seeing is something I describe as a new moral age. And this is really hard for business, because up until now, businesses all over the world have been allowed to be neutral about all sorts of difficult subjects, because everybody in business is there to make money. And that's the accepted thing, right? And there are an awful lot of things that business has sort of gone, okay, well, maybe we don't like that very much, but we can't do anything about that because we're business, right? And we're here to make money. And over the last few years, you are seeing huge backlashes coming against businesses. There are all sorts of conflicts going on around the world at the moment. I don't need to enumerate them. And all sorts of businesses have ended up on the wrong side of one or other of those conflicts. And there will be consumers, there will be people in their supply chain, there will be financiers who won't deal with them anymore. And this is an unprecedented situation. So when we say, how do leaders, deal with this? In certain parts of the world, leaders who stand up and say, I'm a champion for diversity, for climate justice, for decarbonization, circular economy, all these kind of things, in certain parts of the world, they will be congratulated. And there will be a chunk of consumers and suppliers and customers who will say, this is absolutely great. But in a massive part of the world, there are people who are going to say, well, how much is this costing? Actually, it is not your job, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, to change the world. Your job is to make money, pay your taxes, and then the democratically elected people in the population can elect politicians, right? Sorry, the politicians who are democratically elected can then decide where that money is spent and what social and political aims are pursued. So leaders are in a very, very difficult position, and particularly in an industry like shipping, which is very global, because certain of their customers are going to have expectations around, the number of women in the workforce, the number of neurodivergent people in the workforce, right? All these kind of things. They're going to have expectations around emissions. In other parts of the world, other stakeholders will not care, and they will only care if it makes them money. So chief executives and leadership teams are, I call it, one of the greatest challenges of this generation of leaders is going to be navigating this new moral age. Because in the old days, it was easy. You did something if it made money, and if it didn't, then you didn't do it. Now it is far, far more complex. And diversity is a part of that, but it's only one part of it.
Yes. And may I ask, in your point of view, how can shipping organizations build resilience and adaptability in the face of geopolitical uncertainty and its impact on global trade?
Yeah, well, I think what this comes down to is similar to what I was just talking about, that we can't be neutral anymore. So when you talk about building resilience and adaptability, we're really moving from what we used to call value chains to what I call values chains. You've probably heard of friendshoring, the idea that you start to trade primarily with countries and with organizations that share your values, because trade is being weaponized. So again, really, in order to build resilience and adaptability, sometimes choices are going to have to be made. Already we're seeing customers cut people out of their supply and value chains because they're actually becoming a threat. They're becoming a risk. Cybersecurity is the biggest risk that any organization on the planet faces right now. Shipping sits at the heart of multiple value and supply chains. In terms of cyber attack and digital resilience, there is very, very little. And actually, as trade becomes more weaponized, as we see more and more conflicts around the world, then companies are in danger. And there's what we call a kinetic threat as well. So it's not just about computers being hacked. The kinetic threat is, once you gain access to systems, you can actually do all sorts of things that have a physical impact. You can overclock stuff, you can turn engines off, you can do all sorts of things. So it's not merely locking people out of data. These are actual physical threats. So how do we become more resilient? I think actually it is about collaboration, but unfortunately, the idea that you can just collaborate with anyone anywhere in the world is becoming more strained. And I foresee that as we go forward, you're going to see ecosystems develop which are built around more shared values than they are about shared profitability. And that is something very, very new. And it's going to be very controversial.
In the context of global trade, what are the biggest geopolitical challenges facing the shipping industry?
Yeah, well, I think it is this new moral age. I really do. Because part of the new moral age is transparency. It's scrutiny. And as everybody in shipping and maritime is fond of saying, the shipping industry is invisible, but actually it's quite liked being invisible. So it's in a bit of a catch-22 here, because everybody says we need shipping to be more visible so that we can attract more talent, so that we can, tell everyone it's a great career. And on the other side, you have an awful lot of people in shipping saying the last thing we want is anybody looking too carefully about into the cargoes that we carry, the people in our supply chains, and the diversity in our organizations. And, you can argue that maybe the way the industry works isn't important for a lot of people. It, just gets things from A to B, and that's all that's important. But that's a diminishing view. I've got to be honest. I think people do want to understand how the industry works if they're looking at working in it. Because when you look at the Gen Zs, and the Gen Alphas undoubtedly coming up behind them, people increasingly seem to want to do a job that they find meaningful. And if shipping is going to attract people, then it has to be transparent about what it does. And frankly, in an awful lot of the industry, there are things that people don't find very palatable. There are things that would not have gone on had the industry been more transparent, had people seen and understood more about how it works. I mean, shipping has a death in industry rate, I think something like 10 times OECD best practice. There are crews today, now, while we're speaking, who are being held hostage. During the coronavirus, it was quite clear. No government, no organization, no one wanted to take responsibility for the safety and the mental health of seafarers. And I saw an absolutely fascinating press release a couple of months ago. And it said that we should stop making the shipping industry sound better than it is, because what you're seeing is a whole load of new intake seafarers being very unhappy because they're saying this isn't all fun and games, this is miserable. Actually, we can't even get access to home, we can't get access to communications, there's bullying on board, there's all these things. So I think that, we need to get out of this idea that if we just tell people about shipping, everything will be all right. Because what's happening is people are taking a look at shipping, they're going, whoa, are you seriously telling me that this happens in 2024, in a globalized industry that is funded by huge banks and huge, underwritten by huge insurers? And this is where the pressure is going to come. It's going to come down these, through these ecosystems, these funders, these insurers, because they're getting pressure on them now to say, how you can't fund this stuff, because we need to know where your money is going and your customers and how they behave. And so, and shipping is coming under the spotlight. So to go back to answer your question, again, I think choices are going to have to be made. If you want to take cargoes that are slightly questionable, if you want to work with, customers in parts of the world which are slightly questionable as far as the Western establishment is concerned, you can do that and you can probably make a lot of money. But what you're not going to be able to do is also work with customers who are within that different sort of Western orbit, right? Choices are going to have to be made. As I say, again, choices are going to have to be made. And we haven't had to make those choices before. So I think we talk about decarbonisation. I think decarbonisation is tiny compared to the challenge of this new moral age, the scrutiny, ESG, and all those other things.
And what strategies can shipping companies employ to ensure business continuity and to maintain a competitive edge amid geopolitical tension affecting global trade routes?
Yeah, well, I think it, as I said, I think it speaks to what we've just been talking about, what I've just been saying. You ultimately, as a business, and I think you have to go back to basics here. If you are a for-profit corporation, your objective is to make profit. And in fact, in America, if you are an American corporation and you do something that compromises your ability to make profit, you can actually be taken to court as a director. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a case, Ford v. Dodge, where it basically, the ruling was that if you do something from a, employee welfare or diversity, whatever perspective, and that undermines your ability to make profit, then you're breaking the law. So this is an important context, right? It's really important we remember this. For-profit corporations are there to make profit. So how do you, as a corporation, fulfill these expectations, which actually may compromise your ability to make profit? And I think the only way you can do that is by concentrating on your stakeholders. Your stakeholders really are the barometer for what you can do. And if your bankers, your insurers, your customers, all the employees, all these people, if they are of a mind that say, well, you know what, we're not that fussed about X, Y, and Z. The important thing is that we make profit. If that is the view of your stakeholders, then all you can do actually is go ahead on that basis. However, if your stakeholders are saying, no, what we want, what we need from you is also biodiversity responsibility. We need responsibility in terms of cognitive diversity and gender diversity. We need sustainability in terms of your operations. If your stakeholders are saying that, then you've got no obligation other than to fulfill those objectives. So what it comes down to is ultimately your North Star as an organization and also as a person, because there's, take this down to individual personal level, because when we all meet together, and we have conferences, we don't meet as companies necessarily, we meet as individuals. And a lot of individuals ask me, how do I navigate this, not just as an employee or as part of a company. And I think it does come down to your North Star. Ultimately, what are your values? Because if your values don't align with the company that you work in and the stakeholders that you work for, then you're probably in the wrong company. And as I say, you're seeing that increasingly in younger generations who are saying, no, I am not going to do this job if this doesn't align with my principles. And frankly, I think us older generations, I'm grouping you with me in the older generation there, don't be offended. But I think we actually need to take a lesson from them, which is no, ultimately, all we have as human beings and as individuals, are our values. And if they don't align with a job that a corporation asks us to do, then we're at liberty to walk away from that job. And I think we should. And the lesson for the shipping industry there is the more people that do that, the more careful you've got to be about the values that you espouse within your company and the values that you actually stick to as well.
Something else, the geopolitical landscape is totally changing. So what about innovation and sustainability? And how can innovation and sustainability initiatives in the shipping industry contribute to a greater stability and resilience in the face of geopolitical challenges to global trade?
Okay, innovation is a problematic word. For many, many decades now, we've talked about disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation it's an oxymoron. Innovation in itself means incrementally changing things, right? Which is why, but invention actually means coming up with something completely new, which is why you can reinvent something, but you can't re-innovate something, right? That's the difference between the two. And disruptive innovation, the idea is that, you create something that, is completely different, that changes everything. Doesn't make sense, actually. That's not what innovation is. Innovation means gradually and incrementally changing things. It's basically changing things within the same box. Invention means changing the box altogether. So I don't believe that disruptive innovation actually is suitable for the challenges that we face, for a very simple reason, that disruptive innovation is zero-sum game, right? The idea is that you just beat everybody else. You change things so that you have an advantage and nobody else can play that game. That's the idea, right? When you have systemic issues, which is what we have now, what you actually need is integrative invention. You actually need people to collaborate. Traditionally innovation, you have an innovation lab that's completely secret. Nobody tells anybody everything. Everything has to be done in secret. If you want to create solutions that address systemic issues, you actually need to collaborate. You need a completely different approach to innovation. So I would say disruptive innovation in many respects has just broken the rules. And that's particularly true in technology. If you look at the big technology companies, they haven't really created anything new. All they've done is broken the rules and claimed that it was different because it was technology. That's not the case. So we're in a different era now. I don't think it's about disruptive innovation. It is about integrative invention. It is about companies coming together and actually working to solve common problems, because these systemic issues are affecting everyone in the shipping ecosystem, but they're affecting them in different ways. And the idea that, you're going to get technology startups that are just going to solve these systemic problems, as I say, is just silly. It's really silly. We need to stop this. So when you talk about integrative invention and sustainability, What you need for integrative invention is this different leadership. You need this convene and catalyze, bring people together, all different persuasions, cognitive diversity, people who think about different things in different ways, bring them together, put the problem in front of them and say, how do we solve this? How do we, as different stakeholders, as an ecosystem, solve this? And it moves you from a zero-sum game, which is I win, everybody else loses, to what I call a hero-sum game. Because sometimes some organizations may have to give up a little in order for the entire ecosystem to win. And that is a profound mindset shift that we're only beginning to understand. And I'd just like to mention this because people always say shipping, particularly ship owners, they don't want to collaborate, right? Shipping is totally a zero-sum game. And that's nonsense. Just look at all the pools, right? Ship owners through the ages and ship operators have been the first people to actually spot an opportunity and partner or collaborate to grasp an opportunity. Look at the number of joint ventures in shipping, right? So the idea that shipping people can't collaborate is nonsense. It's just we have to frame it in the right way.
And what is the advice you would give to young professionals aspiring to leadership roles in the shipping industry, particularly in navigating the complexities of global trade and geopolitics?
What we used to be in business was neutral, right? There was what you did professionally and then what you did personally. And increasingly, we're seeing those two things actually just align. The idea that you can do something professionally which doesn't align with your personal values is becoming increasingly problematic. When we see all things all around the world, we say, how could people work in this industry or that industry? How can you perpetuate, this inequality, or how can you perpetuate this industry that, is damaging the planet? All these kind of things. We never used to say that. We used to say, okay, well, you have to do a job, right? So you go and do your job, you do your professional thing, and then you come home and you're a decent person, right? Increasingly, we're saying that's not possible. Your values need to extend to the job that you do. So for professionals looking to join the shipping industry, I think they need to look very carefully at what it does and understand what shipping does and understand where that aligns with their values and where it doesn't. And where it does align with their values, fantastic. And where it doesn't, can they actually be a part of changing that if they feel it's important enough? And if they don't feel it's important enough, then maybe they should look at a different industry, right?
So also it's a matter of self-knowing. I mean,
yeah,
self-knowing this.
Yeah, and the shipping industry, actually, you can find out an awful lot about it if you want to, but people don't. And I think, this transparency is good in the respect that the more transparency we have, the more it reminds those of us I say I'm not really in the industry, but, I know it fairly well. And I know a lot of people in it, but it reminds those people working within the industry, what actually is going on around them, because it's very easy to compartmentalize and to say, well, I do this bit and the rest of it is nothing to do with me. I talk about systemic change, right? We are the system. We created this system. Money itself is just a collective act of imagination. The euro in your pocket actually, is nothing. It's a piece of paper. It's only worth anything because we collectively, around the world decide it's got a value. So I do think it comes down to values. And I think obviously I would like more than anything else to see, the brightest, most committed people going into the shipping industry, because I think it's a great place. And I think culturally, there's some fantastic people. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity to genuinely change the world. Shipping is such an important part of global trade.
And Tia, I think also is what I mentioned to the previous podcast, that it's about relationships also. I mean, what I face in the shipping industry is that relationships between these people that you referred before are very important, and how to empower them, how to promote them is something that is crucial.
It is. Relationships is so important, and it kind of takes me back to where we started a bit with this idea, of technology will determine everything, because we talk about data. We talk about all this stuff and algorithms that are going to automatically do all this stuff for us, but actually understanding data, understanding where it comes from, what the kind of conclusions that it can support. And also, data within organizations. Most of that data doesn't really tell you what the organization does. Most knowledge within companies isn't within data sets. It's within people, and it's within their relationships. It's within their experience, their creativity, all these kind of things. So the idea that, people can be replaced by, data sets, used by artificial intelligence to make decisions, it fails to account for the fact that, most of the data around us doesn't reflect the world as it is, and it certainly doesn't reflect our companies.
And let's go a little bit to WISTA International. How do you think organizations like WISTA International can contribute to preparing the shipping industry for the challenges and opportunities presented by global trade and geopolitics?
I think I think WISTA, if you look back over 50 years, I've been doing some research about what was going on 50 years ago, and it's quite amusing when you think about it, just how much the world has changed for women, but not actually everywhere. And of course, this is the problem, that we in certain areas of the world, there are young women who kind of think feminism, well, the battle's been won, what is there left to do? We have access to all these, careers. We have, actually, if you look at education, women are doing far, far better than men. They're doing better than men on all sorts of levels, right? That they get more degrees, they get all these kind of things. But when it comes to going into the workplace, suddenly all that changes. We talk about the gender pay gap, etc. But the reason that there are issues is really the gender pay gap is a parenting gap, which goes back again to what I said at the beginning. As long as we don't have equality in terms of familial responsibilities, parenting responsibilities, all these things. And of course, that's a policy decision. Do you get any kind of, maternity leave? I mean, in the States, you still don't.
No.
And, I'm talking about certain parts of the world where women have, advanced. But I mean, you still don't get any maternity leave. You certainly don't get paternity leave. So there are things outside the control of WISTA. There are things outside the control of IMO or any of shipping's, organizations. These are governmental, these are policy decisions that are being taken at nation state level that we really can't influence. All you can do within the industry is to continue, to hold the banner and to ask for data and say, what is the data around this? What is the data around that? How can we be more transparent of what's happening? Because when you look at the reasons why women don't go into the shipping industry, aside from, obviously very important ones, when I talk about life at sea, things around, the operational inclusivity, things like bathrooms and changing rooms and, all those kind of things, which can be fixed. There is fear because there is bullying and there's, sexual exploitation and various other things that go on. But if you look at the vast set of other things, they're common to men and women. And they are things like the insecurity of contracts. Bullying at work happens to men the same way it happens to women, and the fact that you have long contracts, you have to be away from home for long periods. So a lot of these things are not really things that WISTA was founded to deal with, right? They were founded really to provide a voice for women within the shipping industry, and they've done that extremely successfully. But I think what it's about now is tackling and being honest about the things that we can change. I think there's I don't know if it's an old Jewish prayer. It's something that my grandmother always used to say: Lord, help me to change the things I cannot accept the things I cannot change, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Right. And I think when it comes to shipping and diversity, we've reached the stage where we have to understand what we can't make a difference on, because that will allow us to concentrate more on the things that we can.
And what are your expectations from this year AGM in terms of addressing the intersection of global trade, geopolitics, and the shipping industry?
Well, I'm going to do my best with my keynote to contribute to that. Obviously, that's my job. So my expectation is hopefully to have an hour on the stage with everyone where we can explore some of these issues. But, I know what's going to happen because I go to Cyprus a lot, right? It's going to be absolutely fantastic. There's going to be
Of course.
lots of people. Everyone's going to be friendly. Everyone's going to be chatting. There's going to be high expectation and high energy. And there is always, a banging after party. That's just what you do in Cyprus, right? It's fantastic.
Of
So it's
course, we know about hospitality, first of all.
you know how to look after people. And on a more serious level, obviously, I think that there are going to be some very senior and very influential people in attendance. I think it's going to be an opportunity for relationships to be renewed and hopefully for new relationships and opportunities to be explored. And I hope that I can be a part of encouraging those. But I'm really, really looking forward to it.
Well, we're looking forward to welcome you for sure. It's
Thank
gonna
you.
be great time as always with you. May I ask you if you have a personal message for the industry about diversity? I mean, what you will say to if you had the chance to speak to all the industry, what is your personal message to them?
I think specifically around diversity, it is to understand that diversity, inclusion, equity is not just about women. It's about men
Yes,
too. It's
of course.
about
LGBT.
neurodivergent people. It's about all these things. But I think in our rush to use technology to perhaps make the industry more inclusive to women, we have to be acutely aware of where that means we are not investing in people. So we have to balance. Diversity and inclusion is about making sure that the investments we make are primarily investments in our people, and where technology investments are designed to actually remove people's jobs. And as I said at the outset, a lot of those jobs will disproportionately fall on men around the world. We have to start thinking about where female diversity is coming up against male diversity and making sure that we do not disadvantage trained men in the industry at the expense of using technology to make it easier to get more women onto ships, right? Because that is the looming issue that we have.
Do you have any example? I mean, about men diversity or an example in the industry?
Well,
Uh,
right
yes,
now,
yes.
right now, I mean, if you wanted to hire a seafarer, right,
Mhm,
average, I think it's about $600, $800 a month you pay for a seafarer, right?
mhm,
You invest in technology, that is going to cost you a huge amount more. But
mhm,
we subsidize capital, we subsidize investment in technology, and
mhm.
we actually tax investment in labor. So we have a
Okay.
massive global policy issue here that it costs companies a lot of money to invest in people, and it costs them comparatively less to invest in technology. But all the technologies we hear about now, and it was, I think it was DMV a while back, they demonstrated they got approval in principle. I think was it Kongsberg got approval in principle from DMV to actually have this control room where you had one master and one engineer that were looking after 15 ships, right? And they go, isn't this great? And part of the narrative around that was, oh, now women can sit in this control room because they can do a shift and go home. But the problem
Yeah,
is, what you're saying there is, if that's 5 ships, how many people are on those ships, right? How many,
yeah.
the idea that you remove these roles and bring them shoreside, oh, because women could do those roles. Well, that's wonderful. But what about all the men, the trained men on those ships? And this is how you end up, because we've talked a lot about geopolitics here, right? This is how
Mhm.
you end up in a situation where women go on ships and men don't want them there, because the
Okay.
forces around the world that use these opportunities of male unemployment, right? And they say, look, the problem is all these women coming in and needing to be accommodated, and that's costing men jobs. That's not always the case, but it's a narrative that is causing a
Mhm.
lot of geopolitical shifts. If you look at the attitudes to women in the workplace in countries around the world, and even in the freest country on earth, the United States, you have the Republican Party saying that women should not actually be in the workplace, that they should be at home, right? They want to dismantle a lot of women's rights. And the reason that they're getting this traction is because there are men in America who have lost their jobs to automation, see women being promoted around them because the jobs are not heavy industry anymore, jobs women couldn't do, right? And these men in their droves are being driven towards very right-wing attitudes which work against the diversity agenda. They think it's pointless. They don't want money spent on it, right? So that's a long way of saying we have to be really sensitive that when we talk about diversity, we actually talk about opportunities for men and women. And we don't use investment in technology to disadvantage men or women, because that's ultimately what we're doing, right? We need to invest in people, their careers, and we need values in companies that say that's what we do. And I'm not saying that's easy, right? That is a huge challenge for chief executives and for boards and for, you know, the stakeholders in companies. But, you know, personally, I think that's what we have to do.
Well, it was a great opportunity to talk with you.
Pleasure was mine.